The draft Double Taxation Relief and International Tax Enforcement Ecuador Order 2024.
I call the Minister to move the motion.
Thank you very much, Ms Harrison. It's a pleasure to share on this committee with you as Chair. I beg to move that the committee considers the Double Taxation Relief and International Tax Enforcement Ecuador Order 2024. Now, the order before the committee today gives effect to a first-time double taxation convention with Ecuador. It will provide a clear and fair framework for the taxation and administration of cross-border transactions between the UK and Ecuador, benefiting businesses and the economies of both countries by removing barriers to cross-border trade and investment. This DTC is based mainly on the OECD Model Tax Convention, which contains a set of internationally agreed principles that make DTCs easier for businesses to understand and for tax administrations to apply. I will now turn to some of the main features of this DTC. First, it provides limits on the withholding taxes that can be charged on dividends, royalties and interest, which in many cases are less than the tax rates applied under Ecuador's domestic law. There are specific exemptions for dividends and interest paid to pension funds and for interest paid to financial institutions, which will be of benefit to UK pension funds and to banks with interests in Ecuador. It also limits the circumstances where the trading profits of an enterprise based in one country may be taxed in the other country. This will be welcomed, for instance, by UK businesses that are looking to provide services to customers in Ecuador, such as the life sciences, infrastructure and financial services sectors, as it will ensure that businesses will not face Ecuadorian withholding taxes on some payments for those services. The agreement contains all the minimum standards that were introduced by the joint OECD and G20 project on base erosion and profit shifting. These standards ensure that DTCs are not used to avoid or evade tax. They include the statement in the preamble that it is not a purpose of the DTC to create opportunities for tax evasion and avoidance, and a principal purpose test that denies treaty benefits in cases of abuse. Another anti-avoidance rule, Madam Chair, included in the treaty is a tiebreaker provision for determining the corporate residence based on agreement by the competent authorities of each country. The DTC also allows for the exchange of information between the two countries to facilitate tax transparency and provides for mutual assistance in the collection of tax debts. And together, these features strengthen both countries' defences against tax avoidance and evasion. The order includes dispute resolution provisions that go beyond the minimum standards set out in the final recommendation of the BEPS project by providing that where a taxpayer considers the DTC has not been applied correctly, they can present their case to either tax authority, not just where they are resident. In summary, this agreement is one that the UK can welcome, fulfilling a long-held ambition to conclude a DTC with Ecuador and filling another gap in the UK's network of DTCs in Latin America. It will provide a stable, long-term framework within which trade and investment between the UK and Ecuador can flourish, and I commend the order to the committee.
The question is that the committee has considered the draft Double Taxation Relief and International Tax Enforcement Ecuador Order 2024. Shadow Spokesperson Richard Fuller.
Thank you very much indeed, Ms Harris, and I may echo the fact it's a pleasure to serve on the committee under your chairmanship. The Minister will be pleased that it is not the intention of the official opposition to divide on this tax treaty, but there are a number of questions which he may be able to answer today, but perfectly happy if he wants to reply in writing subsequently. This treaty follows on from the agreement that was signed in Quito on the 6th of August this year. I wonder if he could give us, if the Minister may be able to provide us with an update of the status of Ecuador's ratification of this treaty. As I understand it, that will be subject to their national legislature, National Assembly, but there are elections coming up in the National Assembly in March of next year, and also the President doesn't have a majority, he does through a coalition majority. Or just any update on the status and expected date of ratification, I would be grateful. May I echo the comments from the Minister about the importance of stimulating exports and trade with Ecuador. We have very limited trade at the moment, and hopefully this will help both from the point of view of imports and exports, but also from the point of view of direct investment. The Minister mentioned that this was based on the Model Tax Convention of the OECD. This has been a model, as members probably know, that's been in place really for 30 or 40, maybe even longer actually, years. Many tax treaties around the world signed around these conventions. But there is a part of this where there's a slight deviation, In the explanatory notes in 5.16, under points relating to Article 5, which is permanent establishment, it says it, meaning the agreement, has a wider scope than the OECD model, reflecting Ecuador's preference. In particular, it has a lower threshold of 183 days for a building site to give rise to a permanent establishment. It also deems there to be a permanent establishment where services are provided by an enterprise in the other territory for more than 130 days in total in a 12-month period. As I was very little for me to note that was different from that, I hope the Minister doesn't mind me asking just about that one point that was highlighted in the measure. And then the other is Ecuador, as best I know, is not a member of the OECD and certainly hasn't signed up to Pillar 2, which is the agreement on global taxation, minimum taxation for multinational enterprises. Any implication of this tax treaty relating to Ecuador's status on that matter would be of interest, but again, not for today a matter for us to provide. Thank you.
Minister Murray.
Thank you very much, Ms Harris, and I welcome the comments from the Opposition Shadow Minister and welcome his party's support for this double taxation treaty. Firstly, in terms of Ecuador ratification of the DTC, so Ecuador has indicated that it will complete the ratification process by the end of this year, which gives him some of the timetable I think he was seeking. And so if the committee today supports the DTC, then it will take effect from January the 1st, 2025, as long as the necessary diplomatic exchanges are all completed in time. And so that will mean that they will be able to benefit, taxpayers and other businesses in the UK will be able to benefit from the DTC provisions from that date. Some of the other questions the Shadow Minister asked about related to some of the explanatory notes and to the relationship with Pillar 2. There are provisions taken from the UN Model Tax Convention, which many developing countries prefer, and they're present in many of the UK's treaties, and they reflect all support, which reflect the support for developing countries as they want to engage in the process. In terms of Pillar 2 more broadly, and in terms of Ecuador's approach to that, that's probably more of a question for the government of Ecuador than it is for myself. But obviously, as the Shadow Minister will know, we are committed to the effective delivery of Pillar 2 in the UK, and to make sure that all of the necessary legislation is put into place, and indeed there is legislation in the current finance bill. So I look forward potentially to support for that when it comes to the main chamber, Madam Chair. So to conclude, this statutory instrument today approving this double taxation treaty will make sure that we have a modern DTC in place in both countries to provide that stable foundation for investment and growth that I mentioned, whilst at the same time, crucially, making it harder for people to avoid taxes in the UK if that's something they are trying to do. So again, I'm grateful to the Honourable Gentleman for his contribution, and I hope the committee will see fit to support this order.
The question is that the committee has considered the draft double taxation relief and international tax enforcement Ecuador Order 2024. As many of that opinion say aye. Aye. Of the contrary, no. I think the ayes have it. The ayes have it. Order, order.